sure everybody knows Eric, but just in case you don't know, he's the co-founder. I thought you were the founder. We'll call you the co-founder of Cressey Sports Performance, and he's got a beautiful place in Massachusetts. He's got a beautiful place in Florida, and Eric's got a great podcast. Eric's works on the health side and training injury prevention side with the Yankees, and so I don't think I need to say a whole lot more about Eric because Eric is he's truly been one of the giants in the game for a long time. So with that, Eric, it's all yours, brother.
I appreciate you having me. Thanks everybody for carving out some time, and obviously to Alan for setting this up. It was a cool thing to pull together, and kind of broke the day up a little bit. We're bumping at the facility, so it was a nice little opportunity to nerd out and learn on the side here. I don't think doing a long bio or anything is necessarily the appropriate right now, but certainly happy to field any questions folks have. I really didn't prepare a whole lot. Alan said that this is usually something that's much better in terms of organic conversations and all that, and certainly see some old friends on here. Frank Herman's an old buddy, and I just saw the new message from Dirk. I had a great time at his event in Toronto back in the day, and made some friends that I still communicate with to this day. So hopefully today's a similar kind of networking experience. And how does this work, Alan? Do you MC?
Yeah. So if you want to, maybe you don't have to, Eric. We can go right to questions. But what I thought maybe is if there's a particular topic or two that you really are interested in talking about, great. And if not, no, we'll just open it up. So is there anything in general you want to throw out there as far as topics that you've been maybe working on lately or excited
Yeah.
about talking about?
How about I'll float a topic. We'll go right to barbecue and some sacred cows. But so I'll give you a little context. Back in January of 2020, right before COVID happened, I sat on a panel at the annual ASMI Injuries in Sports Medicine Conference. Actually, it was the Injuries in Baseball Conference, excuse me. And every time they do one of these events, all of the big orthos, I was on the panel with Dr. Alchek, Dr. Andrews, Mike Reinhold was right next to me, Kevin Wilkes was right next to me, a lot of those household names in the sports medicine world. And it evolved into the same kind of roundtable discussion that I think we see at just about every sports medicine conference, is that injury is a problem, weighted baseballs are evil, this, and this. And here we are now, close to 5 years later, and injuries are worse than they've ever been. So I think it, goes without saying that a bunch of sports medicine folks yelling on a panel haven't done much to improve injuries. So I would actually love to hear a little bit more from the crowd what you guys think works. It's actually kind of significant because Dr. Ahmad, our team doctor with the Yankees, hosts his own baseball sports medicine conference. I'm just looking at the speaker list. Chris Camp from the Twins is there. Dr. Noonan from the Rockies is there. Guardians team doctor is there. Dr. Meister is on the schedule. So I'm curious how you think the world of strength and conditioning and sports medicine, and really everybody can favorably impact these negative trends that we're seeing in throwers of all ages and ability levels. Because it's certainly something that stumped the industry. I have my own strong feelings, but I'd love to hear what the group has to say.
I love it, and I have my own strong feelings, but I'm gonna delegate to the group. Eric, you and I can talk about that later. So you can do one of two things. You can raise your hand. You can put it. Oh, here we go. I got questions in the chat room already. It's so funny. So if you have a question, feel free to just put it in the chat room. Or if I can see you, I think I can only really see the first page. You can raise your hand, or turn your screen on, your video on, so then you'll come to the first page, and then you can raise your hand. So we'll open it up. Otherwise, Eric and I are going to tell you our strong feelings on what's going on. Okay, we got a hand. Brian, why don't you just unmute yourself?
I'm going to unmute because I'm still driving, so I can't turn on the camera yet. Just getting to where I need to. But I definitely have strong feelings on this as well. And, this is something you and I just chatted with sort of, roundabout way. But I think one of the biggest problems is that, especially starting young with athletes and as they get older, we need to persuade them that the little things lead to the bigger things. And they have to understand when the little things are actually occurring before they grow into big injuries.
Good, excellent point. Listen when it whispers before, rather than waiting for it to yell. And, and anecdotally, I think what we see are these 24-year-olds, when their ligaments are bad, they're injuries that happen at 12, 13, 14. There's a, pretty significant history of growth plate injuries. There's a lot of stuff that happened at younger ages that has just kind of built and built and built until they finally are bigger, stronger, more mechanically efficient. They're throwing harder. And that's unfortunately when ligaments go at, higher levels of competition.
Yeah, I mean, I saw, Alan knows I saw with my own son. Here he was, 18 years old, away at college, you know, slipped on a muddy mound, thought he could overcome it, pitched the whole season in pain, came back in the summer. We got him a little healthy, went back for the spring. Same exact thing happened. Luckily, nothing worse happened that we know of to this point, but he stayed home this year just to get healthy because he realized, yeah, maybe that little thing could have just been the point where he would have stopped, but he was 18 years old and away at college.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think Dr. Meister's talked about this a little bit. It's just that there aren't just more injuries. The injuries are more significant. It's looking like bombs go off inside people's elbows when he's actually looking at these. I can absolutely speak to this from a frame of reference, like the number of, minor league and major league elbows that are just calcified. The ligaments have become bone just because of, effectively a low grade injury that over the course of time, your body's protective response is just to lay down more bone and calcify over what should be a ligament. So, we're certainly seeing some really crazy things. Obviously there's a lot of reasons for it, but it's a very different time. And, the scary thing is that sports medicine really can't keep up with how performance has increased so quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good, Eric. Boy, I'm biting my lip right now to say anything. Jim, fire away, buddy. Jim, you can unmute. Yeah,
Hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving, and we certainly appreciate you guys putting this together on Black Friday. But I mostly deal with younger kids, let's say 14 and under. And what I've found over like the last 2 years is just getting the younger kids started in a routine arm care program. Doesn't have to be anything too crazy, but with bands and arm circles and some simple things like that. And it's a 12U team, but you hear it all the time, kids with little league elbow and sore shoulders and so on and so forth. My two groups, 11 and 12-year-olds, we didn't have one arm injury all year last year. And I just tallied up to early arm care and, not overloading them too much. We follow pretty strict pitch count guidelines. And what I'm hoping is we see this, continue over time as they do get bigger, stronger, faster, and they're throwing harder because they got prepared early on. They continue with the arm care and maybe we lessen some injuries. We'll see what happens, but that's what's working for me with the younger kids.
I love that. Early interventions, what it's all about, right? We don't have a solution. Honestly, the analogy I use often, it's probably not a great one, but if you look at cancer, we don't have a solution for cancer, but early detection is huge. So you've got to identify kids who are more at risk, whether that's the kid who's, to steal a Derek Johnson line, his arms writing checks, his butt can't cash. It's the kid who's a foot taller than all his peers and is, throwing 78 at age 10. And making sure those kids don't get overloaded, make sure that they're more physically, kind of capable. I love it that you're intervening early. That's big.
Yeah, a simple thing I do right now is, you have parents who are impatient and players who are impatient, right? And we're technically in the off season. It's November. A lot of my kids will be trying out for 7th grade modified baseball. We're in the New York area. And I tell them it's a slow progression. They don't have to be great now, right? We continue to get better and we build up. So when they go to tryouts in March, they're ready to go in March, that we don't have to do too much now. And again, it's just the culmination of the next 3 months of onloading and getting them prepped, which, if you're not available, what's the saying? Somebody help me out. If you're not available, you're of no worth or something like that. I heard it the other day. I can't remember what it was, but it made perfect sense. So you got to keep these kids healthy, and I'm doing everything I can to try to keep them healthy. So, and a lot of it's listening to you guys and taking all of your advice and, whether it be Jaeger bands or Eric, some of your stuff and listening to Sheets throwing things out on Twitter or wherever it is. I don't know if you guys understand how much value you add often, but it's every day I'm picking up something from somewhere from you guys and certainly appreciate it.
I respect that, but I think I could probably speak for Alan when I say a lot of times we've told these things to people thousands and thousands of times, but they haven't acted on it. So, I really respect coaches that are in the trenches trying to do right by their kids. That's important. And I love the emphasis on not overusing like specific pitchers, right? You have a team of 15 kids, like everybody getting to go at it. Like, I've even seen it with my own daughters. They just turned 10 yesterday. And, you see, the bigger girl always plays first base. And, you just have these kind of like people that are pigeonholed into certain positions. And my feeling is everybody should play everything for a long time, just because we see so many big leaguers who are really late bloomers. I'm sure you could talk to Alan, you could talk to, Tyler, a bunch of other guys in this call that have all seen kids that, didn't make their high school team and then wound up in the big leagues. It actually happens pretty commonly. So I love that we're taking a longer term perspective on things.
Yeah, part of the problem is at the younger ages, it's competition and everybody's worried about winning 9 and 10-year-old baseball games, which don't really mean much. And I'll have coaches, tell me, yeah, we don't have any pitching. I'm like, well, what does that mean? We have 3 pitchers. How do you have 9? I said, well, because we've spent the last 2 years developing every kid we have to basically be able to get on the mound so we don't have to stress kids out. And in my opinion, everybody should be a shortstop, everybody should be a pitcher, and everybody should be a center fielder. If you can play those 3 positions, you'll be able to play anywhere on the field. So instead of worrying about the Mid-Atlantic Championship for 11Us, develop these kids and keep them healthy. So again, thanks for doing this, you guys. I'm going to mute myself, and I'm happy to be a part of this and listen to what everybody else has to say today.
Thanks, Jim. Keep fighting a good fight.
Yeah, isn't it cool, Eric? The first 2 comments were about youth and prevention and starting early, and I think it's really powerful. I'm just going to throw in one quick thing, even though this is Eric's time, which is, I think part of getting to them early is also getting to them to understand the importance of like consistent throwing. And in other words, these kids want to do so much high intent throwing for obvious reasons now, and I'm just such a huge proponent of volume throwing and conditioning, whatever that means. So I got a couple questions here. Eric, real quick before I get to these 2 questions, I just wanted you to comment. Something that really hit me was if you could speak to this idea of what you're seeing and your experiences with, because of the analytics and because of pitch shaping and things like that and spin rate, and how does that measure or factor in compared to maybe things 10 years ago, as far as how players may be trained and conditioned and through? And so, in other words, what the effect maybe of analytics and how that's maybe played out. And then we have a few more questions here in line.
For sure. It's far reaching. When you just asked that, the first thing that came to mind. So for context, I competed as a power lifter for a long time. And one of the first things you learn as a power lifter is the difference between a training max and a competition max. If you look at the research, it might be, 10%, where, maybe you've deadlifted 450 in training, then all of a sudden you walk into a meet and you pull 500 just because you deloaded, you super compensated, you stared out at an audience full of, people watching, there were judges in front of you, just, the adrenaline kind of went off the charts. You see some of the same thing every time you turn on an iPad next to a bullpen. Is that bullpen that was supposed to be like a nice touch and feel at 80 to 82, working on some stuff. All of a sudden the tech comes on, and every time you have tech, you have people working the tech. So there's just more eyes. And I think that's one of the things, to your point, is everything has become high intent throwing. And there's actually a fair amount of research on this, where if you tell a kid to throw at 80%, he's actually throwing at a much higher percentage. And we've had some good conversations about like the 50% bullpen that they throw into Tommy John return to throwing ball. You literally can't throw a 50% bullpen. It's physically impossible, but the assumption is that person's probably going to, be at 70%. So I think that's probably the biggest impact that tech has had. When you throw TrackMans, you throw iPads on, you get the Edgertronic cameras on, you get them in a, biomechanics lab, and you start, rigging up, tens of thousands of dollars worth of cameras. All of a sudden people just step on it at times when they shouldn't step on it. And honestly, I did a podcast this morning kind of about some of the most setbacks that we see are right after vacations, where people, they take 10 days off, they go to the beach, they're in Cancun, they're doing whatever they do. So their chronic workload dips, but they come back feeling amazing and they walk in and they want to step on it the first day back. It's why so many major leaguers like want to play catch over the All-Star break. So I really think, there's kind of something to be said for that reason. Huge spikes at times when things should be a little bit more low key.
I love that. Sorry, if someone's got their mic not muted, can you just double check? Thank
Yeah.
you. Thanks, Eric, because I think that's really, and I know Tyler, I have a feeling is going to be crushing
Yeah.
that topic in a second too. But I just thought just as a starting point, it's really important for people to understand, because that's one of my big issues, obviously, is all this high intent throwing versus the volume and the conditioning and the base building first. And as part of your point, what's a perfect opportunity to be in a vulnerable position is to come back from somewhere where you're not in shape, your conditioning is not there, and then all of a sudden the word I use all the time is shock the arm. So, yeah, I love that, Eric. Thank you for commenting. We've got some questions, so let's go with Shauna. She's first, and then we'll get to Tom. We'll get to you in a sec, okay? Shauna said, "Hi, can you offer any advice on how to positively influence and/or encourage learning and education on arm care as a parent for our high school coaching staff that doesn't prescribe an arm care program or might not be as open to learning about the latest approaches?"
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like anything else in this world. When you want to get through to somebody, you've got to build the relationship, and that what you can't do is on the first week of, a season going and tell the coach everything they're doing wrong, because they may be getting pulled in a million different directions. I've even seen this in like my own kids. Like, I'm not always around, so I don't have time to coach. I kind of help out where I can, but with, Major League Baseball travel throughout the season, it's hard to be here for everything. So I try not to criticize when I'm not the one being there full time. Obviously a different story when you're paying to be part of a program and all that stuff. So maybe a little bit more elaborate, but I just think everything begins and ends with nurturing a relationship and then having these conversations more organically. Obviously you don't have them in front of the athletes themselves. Maybe it's a quiet conversation, before or after practice. To me, that's the best way to approach these. You have the option of like, sending them some reading material, stuff like that. But I know for some people that probably comes across as like getting assignments from parents. So it's definitely a really hard conversation.
It is very hard, but if something's worth fighting for, to
Yeah.
Eric's point, you have to massage it,
Yeah.
but find a way, because it's your kids. I always have a saying, which is like, would you rather have ruffled the little feathers early on, obviously diplomatically, or would you rather, a year later, be spending money on a Tommy John surgery and a year or two of missing baseball or softball and maybe not playing again? So to your point, Eric, it is we all know this one. It's a tricky one, but it's something that's worth fighting for. Okay, one more, and then we'll get to you, Tom, and I'm going to have you unmute in a sec, Tom, okay? So from Rob, wondering thoughts on workload monitoring, say pulse, and how that pairs with a more organic style than Alan advocates.
I mean, I think anything that keep people aware of workload is great, whether it's something that's more formal with tech involvement. If you get a kid who's very regimented and will wear that kind of thing, versus something that's maybe just literally on a sheet of paper that they have to adhere to. I think those are good. But yeah, I do think there's a place for, having a little bit more wiggle room. Obviously, Alan, I know you've used the line of like, take your arm for a walk. I always loved impress me on the way in, not the way out, because it gives people a little bit more ownership in the process. To like, hey, like, if you need more time to get hot, you get more time. Just do what you need to do. But yeah, I think we know that there are those guys that love to throw so much that they kind of pay for it the next morning. They don't always realize it. So, probably similar to our previous response is it's about knowing the person and the situation. So I think that's one of the things that our staff at our facility works really, really hard to do. Honestly, over the last probably 2 months, it's like the initial off-season pitching meetings, they aren't just like, what do you want to work on? Are you going to change your slide? Are you going to do this, this, and this? A lot of times it's like, what went bad? What are your tendencies? What do we need to focus on as we build your catch play up and all that side of things? It's really all about knowing the athlete.
Love it, Eric. Thank you. Awesome stuff as always. Tom, feel free to unmute yourself and fire away.
Eric, thank you very much. Appreciate all you do, Alan. Um, Pitch counts. I know more prominent now in high school, obviously. Have we seen an effect yet on whether the positive impact on it or not enough data yet to see the injuries?
I think first off, good to see you, Griff. You're one of my favorites, man. Cishek is he talks about you every week. So what I'll say about pitch counts, there's two avenues. First off, I think in terms of like the nationwide kind of high school mandate done by like, the interscholastic organizations across states. I think it was something like 49 of the 50 states actually put one in. There was one that didn't, but I'm pretty sure now it's 50. But I think it's very early to tell on that one, and I'm not sure we're even going to get good research methods to support that's the case. What I can tell you though is if you look at like what happens in travel ball, like we see scenarios where people are selectively adherent to USA Baseball's regulations, and I think we've all seen like the Twitter threads where you see these egregious, 140 pitch outings from 11-year-olds, and then come back and throw 92 days later. I think we know that's not necessarily good, but I think it's very early to tell on that stuff. And frankly, I'm not sure we're ever going to get the information we need. Most of the studies that have to do with like workload, they're follow-up descriptive studies. They look at kids that got hurt and they compare them to, a group of kids that didn't get hurt, and they compare tendencies, things along those lines. I think we do know that overuse, alongside with, pitching velocity are probably the two biggest things. But do we know exactly what constitutes overuse? I think that's really hard. I can tell you, like, over the years, when I saw a high school kid go 100 pitches in back-to-back outings, they were always kind of just a little bit different, So that's not to say that it can't be done, and it's not a different discussion for a 7-day rotation for a 5-day, but I think it's very, very preliminary. I think there's a place for pitch counts, but I think it's honestly too early to tell. And I know you're in the college game, and to me, the college game is a scenario where things get flipped on their head. Can't remember who we were actually talking about yesterday at our Thanksgiving Day lift at the facilities. Every year you hear about like an outgoing college senior that's like, retiring at the end of the NCAA tournament, and they throw 4 times in 6 days or something like that. And that's obviously like a very outlier example, but I think the college game is a little bit trickier. The other thing I'll just honestly tell you is I think when we try to talk about college injury rates versus pro injury rates, like I always honestly have kind of like a good chuckle. A 7-day rotation is the greatest thing in the world. Like when you put guys on a 5-day, everything changes. Like if you want to skip a start for a college pitcher, you bought yourself 2 weeks. Like in pro ball, you have to decide to put a guy on the 15-day IL and he's going to miss 3 starts. That's a massive deal if we're talking about a major league player. So you can bump workload up and down. So the 7-day rotation, you get a lot of high quality work in. You can get so much more recovery stuff. You can be more aggressive with manual therapy approaches. So I think that side it's really comparing apples and oranges. One thing that's actually really interesting is if you look at some of the Japanese pitchers that may pitch on a 7-day rotation before they come over, they might go out and throw 120 pitches 4 times in a month. So you're looking at basically a monthly workload of 480 pitches, obviously, plus whatever they do in bullpens and warm-ups for games and stuff like that between innings. But then you come back and you say, all right, they need to come over here and they need to make 6 starts in a calendar month. So instead, we're going to make 6 starts of 80 pitches. Like, are they as valuable making 80 pitches coming over here if that's the chronic workload that they built up to? So it's a very different way of looking at it. And I think it also explains why we do see a lot of Japanese pitchers, that come to America and they wind up, either struggling or getting injured, whatever it may be. It is a pretty dramatic workload relative to what they're used to. So very roundabout way to say that I think pitch counts are important, but we definitely don't have the research we need to really validate whether they're working, and if so, how well they're working.
Thank you.
Got it.
Plus, to steal one of your lines, Eric, the pitch counts still are dependent on what's the buildup to it.
Yeah.
So it comes back to the training and conditioning and the adaptation to getting your arm where it needs to be. And not that you want to abuse pitch counts, obviously, but that's still the fundamental roll. Eric, I had a question for you, which I think is going to be huge for everybody, which is talking a little bit about, maybe off-season training versus in-season, and how do you modify it? What kind of changes are made in versus off?
Yeah. You want to talk about throwing or about kind of like the strength and conditioning side of things? What do you think?
I think well, you can do both, but I think strength and conditioning for sure. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, if you want to do throwing, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, on the strength side of things, it's obviously gonna be different for middle school, high school, college, pro. College is kind of like one of these where they're in season, off season, that you have kind of like months at a time. So it doesn't maybe fit with like a true periodization schedule like you might get with a high school player in a colder climate, or obviously a pro player. As a good rule of thumb, most major leaguers who don't go to the postseason are going to wrap up at the end of September, right? So you really have about 135 days between the time that the season ends and the time they report for spring training. So, which works out to just over 19 weeks. We know they're probably going to lose some time on the front end, moving back from their playing city. They're going to lose some time on the tail end, moving to spring training. They're probably going to lose a little bit of like a window between Christmas and New Year's as well. So I generally tell our pro guys that, hey, I'm pretty psyched if I can get 4-week blocks in over the course of an off season. And in many cases, that fourth program kind of blends into what they might do during spring training. And obviously, obviously we were in the World Series this year, so you played an extra month. So, it's a little bit of a shorter window, and something that we're being mindful of right now as we plan for guys. But just in general, I think there are different adaptations that you want to achieve in each one of those phases. And it's not a classic, what I would call linear periodization model, but it's more of along the lines of, all right, month one, you got to put guys back together. It's restore range of motion. It's get their body weight in a good place, build a little bit of work capacity, also build some foundational strength. And then really you can go in a lot of different directions. Like you'll have guys that can walk back in and deadlift 500 pounds on the first day of the off season. And you realize that, hey, strength is probably not the lowest hanging fruit for them. And then you also have, 19-year-old guys who just finished their first year in the FCL, and they have a lot of like big boy strength that they need to gain. So you could spend a little bit more time focusing on that. So I think really things change as we start to get into month two. I love doing like a base of plyometric activity, lots of like 10x10 sprint protocols, things like that. We're actually just building a little bit of skill specific work capacity. We usually throw in the med ball 3 days a week at the very least from guys from the get-go. Most of our guys will work out at least 5, often 6 days a week, kind of from the time that they start up. And then what'll happen is there'll be a lot more on the strength side of things early on, probably 4 days a week. And some guys will be at 3 days a week. I was just talking, Tyler Kinley's one of our longest tenure athletes. He's in the bullpen with the Rockies. He was my third evaluation when we opened our Florida facility in 2014. So, TK and I are our 11th off season together, like guy who rolls out of bed and can, lift the entire squat rack. So we don't need to focus a lot on that. We need to focus on, being elastic, enhancing mobility, optimizing recovery, learning how to like fluctuate training stress and really consolidate it in certain blocks. So, for a guy like him, he might only lift, 3 days a week from the get-go. And then as the off season goes on, I'd say one of the biggest priorities is, it goes from us being the focus of putting guys back together to, the skill development guys being the focus. It's about developing pitchers, hitters, base runners, defenders, whatever it is we need. So in a lot of ways, as we start rolling into December and January and February, we work around the baseball activities where, all right, they're Tuesday, Friday bullpens. We're going to lift we're going to lift Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday. We work things around that calendar. They're doing defense on Tuesday, Thursday mornings. All right, we got to make sure we're also running the bases that day. So it's just one of those things where I think you learn how to accommodate whatever is taking place. In terms of structuring an overall off season, obviously the injury history drives a lot. The movement screen drives a lot. We use FIA marker lists, so set up a bunch of cameras on field. We get some really cool data. We try to use an archetype-driven approach, meaning that you don't want guys just to come in and say, hey, I want to throw like Jacob deGrom or Aroldis Chapman. I want them to throw like other players in our data set who throw like them, whose bodies, move in similar ways. So we batch based on infrasternal angle, joint range of motion, hypermobility, obviously pitch profiles, arm slot, a lot of those different things. We can kind of work backwards and reverse engineer there. We do a lot with force plates. We use Proteus to test rotational power. we loop in our physical therapist if, if guys are, post-op or, they're in rehab for whatever reason. So it is a pretty like multifactorial, built out assessment across both skill development, strength and conditioning, and, obviously rehabilitation as well. So when all is said and done, I think it's a pretty well-oiled machine, but it takes a lot to kind of get to that point. But certainly like the most important thing that I think is important for us, like I often tell our staff, like, hey, before I ever worked in professional baseball, remember, like, we had to compete with organizations for players in the off season, right? We're not a $3 billion company. We're not going to be able to compete on stadium revenue and amenities in that regard. We have to compete based on synergy, how well we communicate. We have to compete based on expertise and just like a genuine care where players might feel like they're getting lost in the shuffle in a large organization. Whereas here, you want to know their name, what they're about, what their goals are, who's in their family, where they're from, all of that. And I think that goes a really, really long way. So I'm big on having like maybe not necessarily a smaller staff, but definitely a more intimate staff where we all know what everybody's doing on a daily basis and everybody's kind of rowing in the same direction.
Awesome. Awesome, Eric.
That was a lot. I will say on the throwing side of things, just because we
Yeah.
didn't touch on that.
Yeah.
I think it's shifted a lot over the years. We've gone from an era where 95% of guys shut down at the start of the off season to now a point where probably 90% of them keep throwing for whatever reason, assuming they're healthy. Scherzer was probably like the biggest poster boy for this for a really, really long time. If you ask Max about it, he started doing it early in his career. He would always get really, really sore when he started back up with throwing. And so he just kept it moving. And watching Max, throw in the off season for a long time. Like some days it's like he'll literally grab a tennis ball, he'll throw it against our medicine ball wall 30 times. Some days he'll throw the football outside. Some days he'll, throw the ball at the beach for the dogs. Like, but his big thing is just keep it moving. And then, before you know it, it's January and he's going, foul pole to foul pole with Michael Walker. Because they built that capacity to go do it. And he's a guy who doesn't really step on the mound until early February. Most of our guys do, something in that regard a lot earlier, but that's something that's been really important to him for an extended period of time.
Eric, I am so glad you mentioned that because that's one of my favorite lines from Randy Sullivan is he says the body is made to move. And I think I know from, dealing with various, especially people in professional organizations. We talk about this also in college because they have that break from Thanksgiving to January. But in professional baseball, as you know, there's that 5 month gap or whatever. And I also have noticed more and more teams now are going to this mentality. I don't think I haven't stole the Max Scherzer information from you many times because I just believe the body wants to move. Look, even if you went out to 60 feet 3 days a week when you technically should be, think you should be doing nothing. I look at it also like a burner on a fire, right? Fires may be hot in March and April, but you can dim it down to super, super low and you can keep it super low for a month or 6 weeks. But I'm really glad you touched on that because I think a lot of people may not really quite grasp this idea of keeping the fire burning, even if it's on super low, as opposed to, as you talked about earlier, taking off that time and then coming back and rushing and shocking the arm. So anyway, I feel like that's invaluable for people to hear. Maybe not an 8-year-old that's, maybe could be playing different sports throughout the year, but I think we're talking about the older athletes, high school, college, especially in professional baseball. I've also found that to be very, very valuable. So thanks for that, Eric.
I think it's a hard group too when you're talking about. I mean, what do we know about guys who have good arms? They like to show it off, and we've all met that kid who literally can't play catch at 60 feet without blowing up his his friend's hand. Like those are the hardest ones to manage on this one because they hear that whatever big leaguer does this, but these guys are literally just, some of them aren't even throwing the baseball, some are just flipping the football. It's really just about kind of like idling, so that when the time comes to ramp up, it happens a little smoother.
Oh, I'll steal that one. See, that's what I mean. We get better every day. Idling. I love that. Yeah, just keep the fire super low, keep it idle. I also have a term I do use, cruise. Keep it in cruise control for a little while, right? Just super light. Love it, Eric. We got a couple more questions. Dr. Bailey, who was one of our speakers last year, and if you don't know Dr. Bailey, I strongly recommend you check out her stuff on vision training. It's very powerful stuff. Doc, it's all yours.
Thanks, Alan. Eric, I was just creeping on your Twitter and I saw or your ex, what we call it now. And I just saw that you're an advisor for AG1. And I recommend AG1 to all my athletes and all my dry eye patients. And I have my spiel, but what's your spiel on how to convince these kids they need to supplement
Yeah, for
and
sure.
that's the right supplement for them?
So first off, awesome to see an optometrist on here. My wife is actually an optometrist too.
Oh,
So
that's sick.
nonstop contact lens triage at the facility every day.
Oh, bless her. That's so cool.
But
That's
yeah, I recommend it to our guys, especially, with it being NSF certified. I think the line I use a lot is nutritional insurance, just because we see so many athletes that tend to be, at a shortcoming one way or another, whether it's not enough fruits and vegetables or just not high quality enough anything. And it's kind of like a sneaky way to get some hydration in. So that's kind of usually my attitude. I know a lot of the guys like the packets. I have my desk here at the facility just where I'm like racing around.
Okay.
During lunch, but definitely been big for a lot of our college and pro guys who are on the road. I think for road games and things like that, you never know what the catered meals are going to be. So I always play the nutritional insurance card. With that said, I do know a lot of athletes that have commented like, I feel like my immunity is better.
Good.
A lot of people with gut health concerns seem to like the prebiotic probiotic aspect of it as well. So yeah, that's kind of where I begin with all of it.
I talk about the gut health a lot. I don't think they realize our gut is our second brain, and there's just as many neurons in our gut as there is our brain, and so it matters, and even just for their concentration, not just for their nutrition.
Yeah,
It's good. Do you have any more light to shed on the microbiome, or is it just it's good for it?
Certainly not my place to say. That's not my realm of expertise. I'll be the first one.
That's fine.
But I do think, at the end of the day, I think what we're talking about a lot with young athletes is making things easy. I think
Yeah.
give them, I remember hearing like a dietitian who, contraindicated dairy for all of her young athletes and all this stuff. It's like, listen, like we're giving them calculus when we need to be working on algebra. So this is something that's relatively easy to implement. Like it's just a super easy thing to throw in a backpack or a backpack or whatever. So I think that's the biggest thing with these young athletes for sure. But yeah, I definitely know the gut aspect of things is super important, but again, not my realm of expertise.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you for your input.
Oh, no worries. Thank you.
Doc read my mind, Eric, because I was thinking about the time we were down in, where was it, Fullerton for USA, the 18U, and I was listening to you speak, and you started riffing on nutrition, and it really was amazing, and I was really going to post that question. So, Doc, thank you for resolving that for me. We're getting close, but Sam, you're up, brother.
Awesome. Thank you. So I kind of have like a two-part question. First one is what would your like generalized advice be for like a post-care throwing program as far as like mobility work, lifting, throwing? And then like the second part of this is like at the high school level where I'm currently at, we're dealing with freshmen who are like 14 to 15 and seniors who are like 17 to 18. So would you recommend having like a generalized program or more of an individualized one? And then how would you get to an individualized one if that's the recommendation?
So just to confirm, you're talking about guys finished throwing, what can we do to kickstart the recovery process?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I would say is, remember, everybody responds to throwing in one of two ways. They either get looser or they get tighter, right? Your hypermobile guys, they acquire more elbow extension. Your stiff guys lose elbow extension. So I think understanding who's who is really important. That's a tough age range, right? Because at 14, you have some prepubescent kids that are loosey-goosey, and you have some other kids that have gone through, 6 inches in 6 months in terms of a growth spurt, and they're very, very stiff, right? So everyone's a little bit different in that regard, but I think you have to identify whether guys get tight or whether they get loose. So what you have to ask yourself is this the time for me to consolidate stress? The first thing I'll tell you is that at that age, guys aren't neurologically efficient to create this overwhelming need for like contrast baths and this, that, and the other. Like, don't get me wrong, I love Mark Pro, I love all this stuff. At that age, eat and sleep, hydrate. Like those are the big three. You take care of those, good things happen. But Usually if they're hot, you know, it's a good chance to get in a lift. You can mix your arm care stuff in afterwards for sure. There's obviously arm care on the front end just to warm them up and all that stuff. But, you know, when I'm talking about younger athletes, I more or less have these are the things that we need to accomplish over a calendar week. Where do we get them in? And then we just allocate accordingly. We have some high days, some low days, whatever it may be. You know, sometimes it may be sprint, jump, change direction. So it's really about, you know, dictated by what your schedule looks like, how much you have them, and all that side of things. It's a hard question to answer though. But here's what I'll tell you. Avoid the trap of complexity. They're 14, they're not that advanced. They probably, you know, skip breakfast, crush soda, go to bed too late, like get them high quality protein, get them eating some fruits and vegetables, enough, you know, food to support their activities, get them to warm up thoroughly, teach them to run fast, you know, get them lifting heavy stuff safely. Amazing things happen.
Eric, did you say avoid the trick of complexity?
Trap, but same thing. They're both
Trap.
tricks good too.
No, I like trap. I like what you said. um, so at this point, Eric, let's do this. First of all, please let everybody know some easy ways to get a hold of you. I'm sure most, if not all of you, have already are familiar with Eric's work, but I cannot urge you, if you haven't, to get to his website. Also, tons and tons of incredible podcasts, you know, as a resource on his page. But Eric, anything you want to share about getting in touch with you?
All good. That's the best place to find me. It's ericcressey.com. You get a free newsletter kind of subscription where there's a whole presentation you can check out on some stuff we do with training, you know, rotational athletes. And then my social media is just at Eric Cressey, both Twitter, X, and Instagram as well. But appreciate you, man. This was fun to do. I'm bummed I got to cut out early, but I will absolutely be listening to the recording.
Yeah, well, no, Eric, really, thank you, man, for doing this. I know we're all grateful for it, and enjoy the rest of the day, and we'll be in touch, brother.
Thanks, buddy. Happy holidays, everyone.
Yep, thanks again, man.